going to talk today about a mapping tool that was originally developed by myself and Sol and Sam, but it was originally conceived as, I kind of came across it accidentally really. Originally I conceived of it in this project funded by the OSRC to collect information. It was kind of an information gathering tool to select participants, interview participants. But it turns out actually it was a really interesting, creative method to elicit more than just information about spatial preferences. And so I'll just talk about the project and its kind of basis and fundamental questions. So the overall project was trying to explore patterns that exist in the migration and non-movement of university students on the transition to university across different geographic and social spaces. And we're interested to find out how different groups frame their geographies at the point of university transition. So when I say frame, I mean how they draw the boundaries in terms of where they would move to and where they wouldn't like to move to. And drawing boundaries not just in terms of kind of actual geographic spaces, but also social spaces as well, in a kind of Bourdieusian sense. And so integral to this was thinking about the sort of social, cultural and economic importance that places hold for different young people. And overall, the kind of ultimate aim is to look at how these patterns relate to issues of social reproduction and sort of intergenerational social mobility. So this was an early paper that we did, that Sol and I did, that we called Regional Structures of Feeling, using quantitative data from the HESA dataset. And we used the government office regions, which kind of carves up geographic space into X number of regions. And so, for example, it carves up Wales, the southwest, the southeast, and we mapped the students' origins and their destinations. And this paper showed that actually regions themselves have the biggest effect. So when you put regions into the model to look at how mobile different students were, that came out as the biggest effect. But you can kind of problematize the way in which we carve up geography here. So we carve it up in a way that would kind of go against what geographers like Massey talk about in terms of mapping space in a very kind of restrictive, narrow sense of talking about the northeast and the northwest. And kind of making these kind of arbitrary distinctions about space, when actually space, like Massey talks about, is much more open and abstract than that and can mean different things. So that's kind of, but I mean, you're kind of restricted with quantitative data sets of this kind. You can also problematize it in terms of the distinction between proximal and social distance travelled. So whilst these people who are migrating, say, for instance, from, the southwest to the northeast, whatever percentage that is, it's southwest moving to the northeast, there's only, there's 1.5% of people from the southwest moving to the northeast. Whilst that's only a minority of people, that's kind of an arbitrary view of distance travelled. It's a kind of proximal sense of distance. But you can also think about social distance that these people might be travelling. So the social distance in terms of the qualitative dimensions of their origin and destination locations and how they might vary. And so then you can think about the different kinds of non-proximal senses in which youth are migrating across social space. But how do you capture that? It's really difficult to kind of capture this social distance that young people travel. And so we were trying to figure this out and developing this mapping method, which, like I said, Sam and Sol, I think Sam originally helped me create it and then trial it, and then Sol and I have been deploying it across different localities. So we came up with this mapping method, and basically we administer this like a survey. We're not present at the time. The young people complete the mapping tool, so they colour in, and I'll show you some maps in a second, They colour in the map according to places where they would prefer to live for university in green, places where they would definitely not see themselves living in red, and places they're sort of ambivalent about in orange, places that they're kind of indifferent really, they wouldn't mind either way. And then in blue, places that they really don't know about or haven't really thought about or considered. So we give this mapping tool to the students, we administer it to the entire sixth form of the school, and then we collect it a few weeks later after they've had time to complete it. And like I said, originally it was a way for me to select participants. So originally it's just information, so whichever participants I kind of was interested in talking to. But actually it really elicited some brilliant data in itself. So it wasn't just a selection tool. And then we interview the participants, but we always begin the interview by showing them the map that they created a few weeks ago and asking them to talk about it to us, ask them to share their interpretation of it, tell us what it means basically, because it's their construction of space, it's their subjective, highly kind of imagined version of geography of the UK and their spatial preferences and prejudices. So, and that really does, I mean, you can fill an hour easily talking to a young person who's completed one of these maps, because it really sparks a hugely interesting, deep conversation about their spatial imaginaries. So yeah, the study, we've completed the fieldwork now, and we've done this across 20 different fieldwork locations across each kind of home nation of the UK, collecting over 1,000 of these maps, interviewing 200 young people, and also 40 of their teachers and other school staff. So you can see that we purposefully selected all of these schools based on quantitative information about their demographics, but also their movement in terms of their likelihood for migrating. So we wanted to capture quite a lot of diversity, and you'll see we tried to do that, well, not just spatially in terms of the locations, but also socially. So we've got private schools, state schools, but also schools with different composition in terms of their social class and ethnicity. And in terms of the advantages really of this method, considering it, reflecting on it, we kind of think that there's 4 key kind of advantages that really help researchers understand young or any participants' spatial imaginaries. The first one is, and I'm going to talk about all of these now, drawing on some of the maps and the data. The first one is that it really foregrounds geography within conversations. It accounts for relationality in terms of how young people construct not only places but also their identities. So it really emphasises the relational construction of identity and place. And it also gives a more subjective framing of place and space. So rather than just talking about regions or bands of space like Gould and White have done in terms of that cognitive mapping, rather than do that, rather than impose a particular geography on young people, by keeping, you'll notice in the map, where is it? We purposely kept the map completely clear of all kinds of places and geography. It's just a map of the UK, it's quite blank. I mean, we wanted to draw the border of the UK, obviously, because we wanted to have some kind of objectivity to it. But we wanted to keep it open, so we're not dividing where Wales is, for example. And that elicited really interesting stuff to do with people's understandings of Wales, for example. Some people thought Wales was up here, and other people thought Birmingham was, I don't know, down there. And so we really wanted to capture what young people's actual geographies are, not having a geography imposed upon them. And so one of the key advantages is that it really does help to ensure that we don't overly frame our participants and captures their own particular geographies as they understand them for themselves. It also gives, when used in a multi-sited way like we have done in this study, an appreciation of the subjective vantage points that people are speaking from. So in terms of thinking about how young people's identities and relational constructions of space are created and understood, where their origin destinations really comes across quite strongly in terms of shaping them. So just to think about this first issue of the grounding geography, you'll see this map here from a middle-class student in one of our state schools in the northeast. I don't think you can really see the colours on the map. Basically, he's coloured in this area here green. I think the north is kind of amber. I think Wales is blue. And the northern bit of Scotland red, and the southwest red as well. So what was really useful in terms of using the map within the interviews was that it really sort of ensured the conversation was framed around their geography and their particular geographic imaginaries. So this student here, you can read this quote, he's talking about the kind of cultural events and activities in terms of the minor scala that takes place in his locality, and he's talking about it in terms of that's kind of, he says here, you don't sort of have that in like further down south. It's the mining communities. It's really framed around the geography of his thinking. The second really interesting thing, especially with the kind of things that we've been talking about today in terms of comparative research, is ensuring that there's a relationality captured through the ways in which young people are talking about their identity construction, and that of others, and also the places that they're talking about and other places around the UK. So this student here, he was a working class student at a private school in the north, and this is his map here, so you can see he kind of, I mean, this is probably one of the students who didn't engage that much in the map, so he's kind of just coloured in places that he really doesn't want to go in red and nowhere else. But, I mean, where he did want to go did come out in the interview, obviously. But he talks here, this is a really interesting quote, I'll just let you read it yourself. So he's talking here very much about, he's talking in a way, so many of the students at this school that he goes to are middle class, from middle class, established middle class families, but he's talking about the ways in which he identifies difference through the encounters that he's had with students, with other students from other schools, from similar middle class backgrounds who come to this school, and from the south. So we were talking about the south and the north and the distinctions between them. And what comes across here is the ways in which his classed identity, well, the classed identity of his classmates in this respect, are defined in relation to the middle class identities of those young people from the south. So you can see this relationality coming out here in terms of the ways in which class is defined in relation to others. And I think Bourdieu's idea of social space is really helpful in theorising that. The same student again, he was talking about the city of Manchester, and he was crafting the city of Manchester in terms of its distinctness in relation to talking about London. So Manchester was Manchester because it wasn't London, and this relationality of the city comes out as well. So you can see he talks about Manchester not seeming to have the same level of attitude or superiority. It's kind of warm in the same boat together kind of thing. How the map really helped him to talk about Manchester as a city because it helped him to talk about London, and it helped him to define Manchester in relation to London and London in relation to Manchester. But it's kind of hard in a regular interview when you don't have a map and where you don't have their sort of for grounding of geography to elicit this relationality. And we also saw this, these are maps from, this last map is from the same school in the north, private school, but also these two maps are from a private school in London, which was kind of more elite than this one, for high fees and different class of students, different social class of students. And you can see here how, I mean, in the interviews with these students, I'll show you in the quote next, talked about spaces and talked about places in the UK in relation to one another. So you can see they have very kind of discrete preferences, spatial preferences, and lots of the places they talked about, London, Bristol, Oxford, Cambridge, I think that's Durham, and similarly here, the kind of Golden Triangle Institutes, and they're in places like Edinburgh that they imagine that they'll find people like them, they imagine they'll find people that are close to them in terms of social space, in terms of their social and cultural attributes. Wales is really seen as a non-place for university study for these people. Even though a lot of them were choosing courses that actually quite highly ranked by Cardiff University and other high-status universities in Wales, Wales was really seen as not a place to go to university. And like I said before, this relational component that the map allows to come to the surface really shows this, because they can see, not just talking about their local geographies, but talking about their local geographies in relation to the rest of the UK. A comprehensive picture of geography really helps this relational construction to come through. And you can see this is a quote from this student, Sam, at this elite school in London. And he talks about, I mean, he's kind of doing the work of a sociologist here. He's talking about the closeness of London to Edinburgh, but he's not talking about it in terms of their proximal distance, he's talking about it in terms of their social distance, and how Swansea is really far away from London. Actually approximately closer, but it's more distant in terms of its social attributes. Another real affordance from this mapping method, and it kind of comes about, I think, because we keep space open, we keep, like Matty talks about in terms of keeping the possibilities and potential of space open by not framing people's geographies, by imposing a map onto them. It brings about unique framings of space and place. So these are two students who completed the map at a school, a state school in Liverpool, and they both have quite different framings of their region. If you just look at this, Liverpool here is, it's kind of Liverpool and Merseyside there, is framed quite kind of distinctly, whereas this student takes in much more of North Wales and North West and other areas. If you imposed a kind of geography of the UK as Wales and England, maybe this student might not have been kind of open to constructing space and place in that way. This student talks about going to North Wales lots on holidays and what have you. So by not imposing this geography, by keeping it open, you allow for these kind of subjective interpretations of space to come through. And finally, this issue of subjective vantage points, reflecting on what a lot of students talked about, it really came out as something, and I suppose this is because we used a multi-site case study approach. It really came out that actually talking to young people across different localities and talking to them through their medium of this map really showed how their locality influenced the way in which they saw their identity and saw where they wanted to go. So this student here, Nadia at Milltown School, it's in a locality that's very diverse but also quite segregated in Yorkshire. And this student talks about how living and growing up in this segregated community made her want to move to another diverse city where she felt there was more integration of different ethnic groups. So you can see how she was able to look upon the geography of her university choices in a way that was kind of subjectively from her vantage point through the map. Just make a couple of reflections. So yeah, I mean, what I've already said really, I think this method can bring about some really interesting insights in terms of relationality and subjective vantage points, but there's obviously also issues in terms of how we analyse these maps. And Sam, who I said just at the back there, is doing something really interesting with these maps globally. So he's taking these maps globally and looking at university choices for students